Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a review video of the Book Naturalist Book Club pick for the month of September. And that's Two Trees Make a Forest: In Search of My Family's Past Among Taiwan's Mountains and Coasts by Jessica J. Lee. And this author is a British-Canadian Taiwanese author. She currently lives in Germany. Her background is that she is an environmental historian. She has a doctorate in that field of study, and she has published one book previous to publishing this memoir. And so let's just put this into context right from the beginning. What is the field of environmental history? And so I looked it up because I wasn't exactly sure. And so the definition of environmental history is the study of human interaction with the natural world over time, both the role nature plays in influencing human affairs and vice versa. And I mean, honestly, that's what this book is. It is a book that's hard to define. It is not just one genre. It is not simply a memoir. It's a memoir combined with nature writing, history, geography, and travel writing, all mixed in together. So there's a lot of different elements in here, and I really enjoy that. I really like that in my nature nonfiction. I like it when the author provides a lot of contextual background to the issues that they're discussing in their work. So this book is really Lee's attempt to discover her connection with the island of Taiwan, because that is where her maternal grandparents were from. Actually, her maternal grandparents were born on mainland China and moved to Taiwan when they were young adults and never were able to return to China due to political upheaval and that separated Taiwan from China and made travel back and forth between the two places impossible. So her grandparents lived in Taiwan, got married, had Lee's mother, and then immigrated to Canada, which is where Jessica Lee was born herself. So Jessica Lee's dad is British, of British ancestry. And so they lived together as a family in Canada. And then when Lee was an adult, she moved to Great Britain and has since moved to Germany. So she's, has moved around a lot herself. Her parents, or her grandparents, I should say, moved around a lot. So she has a lot of backgrounds and influences in her family history. And that left her with this feeling that she was sort of missing some piece of her life. And so when her grandparents got, they became quite elderly, and her grandfather, and like the last bit of his life, got quite ill and moved back to Taiwan, and her grandmother stayed in Canada. And after both of her grandparents had passed, some writings that they had done came to light and became, her mother and she became aware of these writings, and Jessica herself began to read those writings. They were written in Mandarin, I believe, and she had to get a translator to translate them for her because it was a style of writing that she was unfamiliar with, even though she does herself speak Mandarin. So she because of these writings that her grandparents had separately made, it really sparked her curiosity and deepened her desire to really know her ancestral roots in Taiwan and to discover if she had a connection with that place. So she actually travels in this book. She's detailing her time spent traveling to Taiwan and around the whole island of Taiwan and experiencing the different landscapes and ecologies and peoples of the island. And that was really fascinating. So she divides the book up into several sections. There's a section called Island, a section called Mountain, a section called River, and a section called Forest. And each of those sections details not only her travels and her experiences in nature in those particular environments, but also what she was discovering about her family at the time and the connections between those landscapes and her family's history. That was really fascinating. And into that, she also brings the context of the political and geographical issues that were happening in Taiwan over the years, the history of Taiwan as a place, the history of colonialism in Taiwan, the different the different other countries that came in and imposed their structures and way of lives on the indigenous Taiwanese people. Really, really fascinating because, there were ways of doing things, traditional ways of doing things, obviously, in this place. And then Western influences come in and sort of take over, and things you may not think about, like, for example, mapping. The way that mapping was done back in the 1800s, by Western countries was very different than how it was done in China and with Chinese experts. So when these areas like Taiwan sort of give way to a Western influence, it changes how things are done from the traditional ways. And then some piece of your history and your culture is lost in the process. And I found that to be really fascinating. The other thing, before I read you a couple selections so you'll get to know the voice of this author, the other thing that I found really interesting was Lee's use of language throughout this book. Because she is a bilingual person herself, but she doesn't know all the languages that the relatives in her family that she's trying to communicate with know. She at times feels lost. She feels like things are not being communicated to her in the appropriate way. She's not communicating appropriately to others. And that all is a barrier and creates, the way that she talks about language, she talks about how it can be both a barrier and also a lens through which to observe things, whether that be natural things, cultural things, political things, whatever. And I think that is a really, really interesting aspect of this book. Now, I also want to read you a couple of selections just so you get an idea of the voice of the author. Both of these selections have to do with how language is used and how that can influence how you see the world. Language is a tricky thing. Scientific labels cannot delimit the many names by which our world is ordered. As I learned the plants in Taiwan, I learned to match their common names to their scientific binomials, Mandarin names to Taiwanese. Once in a while, I found no English translation, and a plant was left to exist only in the linguistic limits of my mind. I could name but a tiny fraction of this island, and much remained caught between two worlds. I love that. And then this is another section that I think really speaks to the language aspect of this book. Our versions of the truth so often dwell in the language we choose, but the words we use have consequences. They signify allegiances, shared histories, harms, and losses. In my childhood, I heard phrases like Taiwan, the true China, or Chinese, but from Taiwan, and rarely felt pressed to make sense of them. The task of naming so often exceeded me. Instead, I felt a discomfort, like an amorphous thing. My complacency, I know now, was a privilege afforded by distance, by the ease of light skin and features that pass for whiteness. I do not know why we did not visit Taiwan during my childhood, and I never asked. Instead, I negotiated the world as a dual citizen of Britain and Canada, casting my life in those frames of reference. The question of whether to call myself Taiwanese or Chinese felt a complication too far. I often found myself with too many names, too many homes, and no fixed sense of which order to arrange them in. So, I've talked a lot about the language and the cultural context of this book, but the way that she talks about the actual environmental landscapes and ecosystems that she encounters in Taiwan is really amazing too. She hikes in the mountains, she travels to the coast and talks about a national park that's been developed there and the impacts of sea level rise along the coast of Taiwan. She swims in a lake full of drowned cedars. That was a really amazing episode. There's lots of discussion about different birds and animals that she encounters. Taiwan is in the middle of the Asiatic flyway, and so migratory birds heavily utilize Taiwan as a stopping place. One of which that she talks about a lot in this book is a spoonbill. So that was really cool. So yeah, lots of, if you're in these reads for the nature and the science, you get that. And if you're in it for the memoir, you get that. And if you like cultural and political and geographical context, you get that. So this book really is giving a lot in a short read. So yeah, I very much enjoyed my time spent with this book. I will say my one caveat with this was it took me a while to get in. Like it took me probably 50 pages to sort of really sink my teeth into this book and feel a connection with it. And I'm not sure if that was me and just the headspace that I was in at the time, or there was some other barrier that was creating that disconnect for me with this book. But once I was in, I was in. And then the last 3/4 of this book, I really flew through because I was enjoying it so much. So yeah, another successful read for Book Naturalist Book Club for me. That was for September. So in October, we will be reading Jane Goodall, In the Shadow of Man. So this is a classic of nature writing, a modern classic, I would say. I have never read any Jane Goodall. Of course, I know who Jane Goodall is. I knew that she lived in Africa with chimpanzees and other primate species, and so I know what her research was focused on, but I don't know anything else other than that because I've never read any of her stuff. So I'm excited to learn more about Jane Goodall and the research she was doing, and see how that connects with some of the other things that we've been reading with the Book Naturalist Book Club. I hope that you had a chance to read our pick for this month. If you did, please tell me down below what you thought of it, if you thought it was a good book or not, and what you liked about it or didn't like about it. And then I hope that you can join us in October in reading Jane Goodall. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read, and I will talk to you later.